organizing and coordinating, but it takes a lot of logistics to do that. These athletes now need to recognize that these expenses are now theirs. And even though it is coordinated and planned by their managers and their athletes and their the agents, these expenses, and it takes a lot of coordination because you now have to plan to ensure that your visa requirements are in place, your passport is in place, and all of that. So these athletes, to get to elite performance and ensure that I want to just put in that elite performance, meaning moving from high school to a pro athlete to elite performance, is a process, and it is not going to happen overnight. And so some of the coordination and the requirements in travel and logistics that enables them to get to those track meets, those Diamond League events, involves a lot of logistics, and they now need to be able to plan how they pack that bag, how they move from taking that bus and running to school to now planning their itineraries, ensuring they're going to the right airports, and just the right attitude of coordinating their logistics to get them to those venues that they will now perform at an elite level. So it takes some time and some logistics. I do believe in the education that they should take the time to get nurtured in getting the skills, life skills. Education is key, whether it's academic education or skills education, to transition from that high school, to transition in organizing and planning and coordinating, getting to that event, because it's no longer the school planning it or the teams planning it. You now have to take responsibility for your getting there, whether through the right systems and agents in place, but you have to take ultimate responsibility as well, the senior athlete, the senior professional, in that they need to be able to organize getting to the airport, having all of the visas and all of those things, and don't take it for granted that the agent or the manager must take responsibility for it. And they must be able to be fairly independent, that they have money to be able to, as a backup, to get them from the airport to the accommodation, and to ensure that they're able to manage their logistics and planning to get them there. And as well, I will also ensure that we have the fans in the stands supporting these athletes, because it's also important for them to see the Jamaican flag, Jamaican fan base there supporting them and supporting Brand Jamaica.
All right. Thanks, Olive. So pretty much what we have heard, get the right people to work for you, go to school, learn the issues. Let me tell you, the issues are plenty now. When QB was in college with his friends, it was more about civil rights. We still have those, but there's so many other issues now, and there's so many other equality, equity, and all those things. So lots of things to think about, and then the responsibility becomes yours. But let me go back. I'll probably, between Marlon and Adrian, let me go with Marlon first. Marlon, you are now pretty much an active younger coach. What is the mindset of some of these youngsters who are raring to go and who would think that, yes, this is it, I jumped or I ran some really great times at champs, and I want to get in the picture? Before Marlon comes in though, guys, remember to take the poll, and if you have questions, send them in for the panelists so we can actually answer. We have added some other part, and sorry we left out a particular one of them, but yes, please take the poll. Marlon, what are some of the issues that you have with the youngsters who think that this adrenaline rush is there and I'm ready to go? Tell us what's the mindset of the current athletes.
Pleasant evening, everyone. And I take the compliment of being the youngest among these brilliant minds, many of whom I have emulated over the years. And certainly I feel privileged to be a part of this group. Currently, the mind of the now athlete, the new athlete, the athlete moving on to college, or the athlete making waves or improvements in his class, tends to always want to do better. But sometimes one of the things that sort of affects the transition is the subculture that affects the team culture. And the subculture many times is what interferes with what a coach wants to ensure that the athlete, of course, is making the progression based on scientific knowledge. The subculture sometimes causes the athlete to do things outside of that. And over time, it certainly can interrupt a team dynamics. I want to segue to what we do at GC Foster so as to encourage our young coaches as it relates to child development, coaching athletes for human performance, and so forth. In our specialization classes, we try to encourage our coaches, many of whom are coaching in some of the top schools right across the islands now. And I must thank Sir Wilson for giving me the privilege because certainly I have garnered a lot of experience from doing that. We want to ensure that whenever we prepare our coaches, they understand the role that they play in the development of the athlete. And it's not just for the athlete to be their best in 1 or 2 years. Longevity is important, and it is one of the things that we preach in our program. And of course, they too have to be prepared to deal with the changes that will happen in the athlete's career, student athlete career throughout high school. And as they make their transition to the next level, of course, especially when you're at first year one, you want to take the time out to spend more time preparing them for the next level, not just by preparing them to run, jump, or throw, but certainly certain responsibilities that you probably would have been talking to them about from previous classes, that they understand that whenever that time comes, there is not, you won't have the coaches behind you, as many persons would have said before, and that it is going to take a different level of responsibility for persons to be successful. Yes, we have also used the examples of many who have gone on before, who were exceptional at champs, who were exceptional at junior championships and so forth, youth championships and so forth. What happens thereafter? So we do that with the hope that with the team that works with the athlete, everyone would pretty much contribute and understand that every role is vital to the athlete's future success. And certainly, longevity, as I said before, is one that we always have to try our best to contribute to ensure that that athlete after high school has at least 15 years, like Mr. Bolt would have as a result of careful planning, application of the theories and methodologies of training as it relates to the principles of training and as it relates to the individual capabilities of the athlete. So we always try to ensure that we put the athlete first, his development, his future first, rather than the ego and the bragging rights of having a champion.
All right, thanks. So Adrian, you get the last word. You probably have been somebody who has, you get them when they're transitioning in, they have already passed the high school level. Pretty much you've really dealt with the older athletes. What has been their mindset coming in, and how have you helped to clear the pathway for them? Some who were not necessarily at their best, but you have converted a few of them. What has your experience been like as an international sports agent? Adrian? Where is Adrian? Adrian gone? No? Where is he? All right. All right. He may have jumped off. Um, the truth is Jamaica continues to lead the way, and we welcome our friends from the Caribbean who have joined in. I see some people from Trinidad and Tobago, and I think Antigua, that's our online. Let me come back to you, Mr. Fennell. When they come to the international games, as an administrator in the business, what are some of the questions you get asked? Because one of the things, they think it's easy because champs has been in some ways extremely good for us, but it has also been very bad. It has set us up as a country. What are some of the questions you get asked, and how have you really said to them, this is what the process has been?
Moderator, let me just say that I never cease to be amazed by the some number of questions that are being asked, which shows a lack of preparation and a mindset in terms of going to a games and what it all means. There are many, many issues, and we get questions about resources. Why can't this be done? Who can help them and who cannot help them, etc. There's no shortage of questions. And it appears to me that when you bring them all in a village environment and they're there and they have time on their hands and they start to talk, and some leaders can relate to them quite easily and they talk openly, it's amazing the knowledge gap about what it takes. Earlier on, Mr. Mills was talking about the support system that's necessary. They don't have a clue about the long list of support system that's important for them, even at the school level. And athletes don't know that there are costs involved in all of that. Somebody else is bearing, they're isolated from that in the school because the past students and all those support areas is taken care of fully. And the athlete does not understand any of that, which leads me to the question, and I don't know who can answer this, Madam Moderator. In every school, we talk about from the school system to the league, but in every school nowadays, we have counselors, we have career guidance counselors and so on. Do any of them have on their agenda career guidance in pursuing a career in sports, not just as an athlete, maybe as an administrator or some other support system? Is that anywhere in the guidance of our youngsters at school, where they're approaching champs or approaching the period when they will be leaving school and going to the outside world? Is that, to my mind, that's a fundamental question, because we do not regard sports as a very important social operation. We regard it as an event thing, and the event is finished, you finish with sports. Sports as an athlete, sports as an administrator are now legitimate professional careers. Are our schools in the preparation of youngsters guiding our young people as to the pathway that they can follow when they leave school?
I'm sure Mr. Mills or Mr. Wilson would be happy to take that on, particularly the school leader, who I'm sure would be happy to talk about that, because the introduction of physical education, even as a subject at the CSEC and CAPE levels, showed an indication of what that in its essence could have been.
But not just to those two, Madam Moderator, but somebody like Olive. As we all know, Sergeant Olive is very close to our old school. And I'm sure she, because of her constant and sustained involvement in sport, she gets asked by the girls at the school, either they're athletes or otherwise, things that she has to answer. That's not a part of the overall preparation for them for the outside world. So I'm interested in the answers.
Carol, can I go ahead?
Yeah, man, sure.
I'm actually looking at the chat forum. I'm seeing where some of our distinguished guests, they're asking a lot of questions, they're making a lot of suggestions. But one of the things I've noticed is that the psychological and mental preparation is being mentioned a lot. And it is extremely important that the focus is on this aspect of the preparation. At GC Foster College, in collaboration with the Ministry of Sport, we have introduced the Optimization Hub program for psychological and mental training of the mind, mental resilience, sorry. And what I've noticed, those persons I believe that are benefiting most are not the persons who necessarily are involved in the sporting arena. In other words, there is this disparity, this disconnect of combining the physical with the mental. And a lot of times, the persons who have the most influence over the athletes must be blamed. And I will start with the coaches. I think it is extremely important for coaches to educate themselves, and in doing so, also educate the athlete's mind, not only the physical being. And so the parents must be involved. The parents must understand that they have a critical role to play in the development of the youngster. And it has nothing to do with finances, really. A role can be just giving mental support being there for the athlete, not only when they are doing well and they become popular. And so it is important that the total training of the body and the mind is given serious consideration, and the influencers, and I'm using some of the words, I'm plagiarizing some of what I'm seeing in the chat forum. The influencers of the youngsters must understand that is an all-encompassing process that is going to make the youngsters do well.
Mr. Fennell, your question was answered. Olive, talk to us about, as somebody who works closely with particularly a girls' school. How has it been? Because we find that sometimes we are afraid to answer the questions. And I'm going to bring in QB next because he's close to the seat of power where, and I'll let Olive go first.
Well,
Girls.
as Mr. Fennell said, going back to Queens after 1978 victory and going back to Queens as a mentor and a mother and a manager of the sports, assisting with the sports program, there has been little that has been put in place to assist the athletes to be able to manage that transition from high school to the elite level. Fortunately, some of my athletes that have passed through the Queen's system and have gone on to reach the Olympics have managed fairly well because they have focused on their education. But in terms of having a guidance counselor assisting those athletes, it is not there at the Queen's School. What you find is that the schools, the athletes have become so dependent on the coaches to be their counselor and their guide. And they have depended on the parents are almost have been, because you have so many single family situations where these young girls are coming out of single family homes and they have become dependent on the school giving them the lunch or the food, and then the coaches putting so many things in place for them. They come dependent on the coaches into making their decision, making their travel plan, deciding whether they go to school locally or abroad, deciding which scholarship they take up. And so the athletes have become dependent on the coaches and not able to make decisions for themselves. So we need to put more, the old boys and the old girls try to do assistance, the financial support, especially the old boys. But we have those old boys, the boys transition to the elite performance. You're not seeing that happen either, because I don't think we have a proper mentorship and support systems in place to support these athletes. I also find that the athletes going off to schools abroad, I think those schools have more in place to assist and support athletes as they transition at this high school level. Because based on my experience in having to assist athletes who have been left by the wayside because they, in their final year of school, they got injured or got hurt. And so there's no assist or support, whether from our organization or ISOs or the J3s or anybody to assist that transition more. There's nothing in place. So you have had to, I don't think persons taking up scholarships locally versus going abroad. I think the schools abroad have more infrastructure in terms of medical facilities, in terms of giving them support, in terms of advice. If there's not everybody is going to be strong, but academically, but they ensure that those athletes get their degrees and they more of them come out with a degree at the end of the day, utilizing their talent to get them their scholarship and get their degrees. And so therefore, it is important to have that infrastructure in place, those systems in place. And I don't think we have enough of that in Jamaica to support the athletes moving from the pro level to the high school to the pro to the elite level. We need much more of that in place, that mentorship, that management to guide the athletes. And yes, you have the parents, and parents also need a little guidance and education sometimes because they themselves don't know the process. So they rely on the coaches, they rely on the managers and leave their children sometimes to fend for themselves, and we don't have that infrastructure in place to assist the students moving to that level. And that is why sometimes, as Mr. Mills say, you have those that go to school, those that try to be part and part, and some that are pro. But without the right mindset, without the right infrastructure in place, so a lot of these athletes will not get to the elite performance and just take a first contract and maybe not, or go to school and never go on to excel elite performance.
All right, thank you, Olive. Guys, remember to take the poll if you're on, and we thank you for the comments. QB, I wanted to ask you a question. After all these years, give me a kind of definition of the best suited athlete for you. Forget what their performance is on the track. Marlon spoke about longevity in a comment, and I want you to give me the definition of what and who you believe are the athletes. Not naming names, but what are the qualities and characteristics of that junior that is to make that transition. Give me some words that you can describe them. You're on mute. Unmute your mic, Cubic. Oh, sorry. Unmute. We're not hearing you. Sorry. Host, can you unmute Mr. Sigubin?
Am I okay now?
Yeah, we can hear you now. Yeah.
Okay. As I was saying, Carol, it's incredible information that is being sent out by all these panelists. But all roads, streets, avenue lead back to education. It's all about education, Carol. And you can have the most talented athlete, but as Olive says, if you don't have the life skills, they won't make it. They will not make it, because some of them think they're entitled. They come into the sport thinking they're entitled because they're a professional. They're entitled. They never adapt. They never come with an open mind. They never adjust to what they have to, because at the high school level, the coaches, they're focused so much on champs and winning that they don't have the time to really, including the parents, help these young athletes to become total human beings in the sense. And they come with bad attitudes. They're disrespectful. They're rude. They come with a lot of injuries. I mean, I am speaking raw. I'm not gonna cherry coat it. I'm gonna tell you it like it is. I presently represent 9 athletes, and the reason I represent 9 athletes is not because I can't represent 40, but I'm very selective because of all the things I've just said to you. Because a lot of them fall by the wayside because of all the things Mr. Fenella said, all the things Olive has said, all the things Mr. Mills has said, and Mr. Wilson, because we're living it every day. We're living it every day. And the worst thing can happen is the misinformation given to them by old boys, old girls, people who don't know anything about what's going on a daily basis in the sport. You have all these people with misinformation in their ears, telling them this, telling them that, just disruptive. And that's the problem. A lot of them will not make it. They will not make it because of all those things that go by the wayside. Life skills. It has to start at the high school level with the parenting and the coaches. And they emphasize so much in winning that the kids lose out in just being a total human being. In my opinion, this is my opinion.
No, absolutely, and I understand, Mr. Mills. You have been there across the board in the schools. While QB didn't quite tell me the definition of those youngsters, though. What is the solution, though, Mr. Mills? I mean, you were there at the high school level. You have come really full circle. You have also managed track meets, and you have seen them come, seen them go. What are some of the things that we really need to get done, one as a nation and one as an industry, because we essentially are the people that are managing the industry? What do you think needs to be done, sir?
Well, I think that a lot needs to be done in terms of educating both coaches and athletes. And in this aspect, it needs a leader. And I would think that the National Association, the J3s, could undertake, along with ISA, could form some alliance and put together a program that they could invite coaches and athletes, and from time to time have seminars, and you have speakers, guide, giving out the correct information and guidance that would spread that kind of gospel into the system. This would help to counter the false information and misleading guidance that a lot of them receive. And I think it thrives in the atmosphere of ignorance that a lot of them do not know, because there's nobody who have the experience and knowledge in a formal situation disseminating this kind of information to them. And so obviously they're going to be left to choose their own pathway and believe what they think sounds best, are from those who have their attention the most. So I think that it needs to come from a more formal situation where I think the national body could get involved in not just waiting for them to come forward to select them on national teams, but to create a program of interaction and involvement from the infancy, so that as they grow within that kind of environment of getting the correct information and guidance.
Okay, thank you, sir. Dr. Jones, so we hear about education, and a lot of even some of the misrepresentation that comes on is really about the physical status of people. You made some very valuable points in your first part, and I want you to repeat them, but in the context of now that there's a recommendation that there's an alliance. What then are some of the basic steps you think that we should take in understanding? Because what I find, even as a former phys ed teacher myself, a lot of our students don't understand how their bodies work. And so even in the growth, the length of your limbs, and even the weight and so on, how then can that be part of an overall education program to guide our athletes and the people that train them? Unmute, please.
Yeah. All right. One of the guides that we try to recommend to coaches and to athletes is that all athletes are different. All athletes go through their growth spurts at different points in time, etc. So at the time, coaches come and they have one program that they administer to all the athletes. And then an athlete starts to get hurt, and then they have it as athlete being soft, and athlete being this, and athlete being that. Instead of looking at the program and at the athlete's development, they just dismiss the athlete and say that pretty much that is the athlete's own fault. So what a coach has to recognize that when an athlete is going through a growth spurt, that they need to kind of back off of the training, because their growth plates and their attachments are where the muscles sort of are to the bone, because the cells are dividing more rapidly, then they're more easily damaged. So you definitely don't want to be lifting too heavy or doing too much explosive stuff and kind of back off on the workout. And especially during the growing years. But girls stop growing around at age 14 to 15 and boys 17 to 18. So you definitely do not want to overload them or work them too hard, especially in those growing years, because like I said, they will get stronger just by being alive, just by going to bed in the night and waking up in the morning. They are a better, stronger human being. So the coaches have to recognize that each athlete is different. If you see an athlete going through a growth spurt, so all of a sudden they shut up, you need to probably back off of their training regime and not work them as hard, definitely in lifting weights. I'm working with, I've been advising a friend and coach who has one athlete who is significantly taller than the rest of his other athletes, and he keeps having back problems. And through discussion and training modification, we've learned to back off of some of his training program and focus on his core strength more than the other athletes that are with him. And then he doesn't participate in his event as often as the other one, because he's much bigger. So therefore, the stressors on his limbs and where his muscles attached are significantly greater than those of the athletes that are smaller than he is. So don't just dismiss an athlete. So don't just dismiss the athlete. Try and look and see what it is about that athlete that it is that you might have to address differently. And yes, you have your general programs. However, for each athlete, you might have to focus on a different aspect. So one athlete might have to be working on his hamstring strength more than another athlete. Another athlete might have to be working on their core strength more than another athlete. Another athlete may need to work on their flexibility more than another athlete, and it varies. So though there's not a panacea, there's not a one program fits all. You have your general rules and principles, but you need to, as you go along and as you learn more about athletes and sort of develop programs or tweaks a program that are specific to address the needs of that particular athlete.
All right, so the all-important question is now going to come up, and I'm hope anybody can take this. What I'm hearing all of you saying, important thing is education. We're obviously a sporting nation, despite our lack of ability to cheer them on, even if they're not winning. We are a country that depends on sport to get international branding. That said, what I saw in Champs, May 11 to 15, reorganization of the schedule of Champs, and it worked. Champs ended at 5 o'clock or before. So that's one thing. Two, is it now time for a sport school, high school, at the high school level? Is it time where we have something like what the rest of the creative world is doing, where they have specialist schools to prepare prototypes to send them out? And anybody can take this question. Because ideally, yes, we'll still have the inter-schools competitions, but is it now time that we have at the high school level, because we are GC Foster and so on, that there is a school that looks after sport?
Well, Carol, maybe I could start. I think in the overall plan of the government of Jamaica, there needs to be this kind of thinking. As we all know, in most first world countries, Australia, some countries in Europe, there are specialist institutions that identify talent from a very early age. And so when you have, for example, academies that Messi and great footballers came out of, and you see the amount of time that they would have spent in developing their God-given talent. Someone said it earlier, it requires experience and technical support, not support that is not trained, support that is not, persons are not knowledgeable, but they are doing guesswork. And that is also a business. And we could even start with GC Foster College, because I do believe that there is so much more that can be done nationally in relation to the institution. I think that we have not improved in relation to our specialist areas that we do well in, sports, culture, and so on. And so there's a place for what you just mentioned. And I think this is the way we will have to go. But there must be an acceptance from the grassroots level. And again, I'm seeing the forum, and there are persons there, they are talking about it. The principals must understand the importance of sports as a career. ISA is seeing sport in a business way, in a business form. Someone also mentioned, this is not my words, that in America, the universities align sports with business. And so there's no reason why we're having these world-class performances and we are not putting the support in place for the youngsters. So when we talk about the education, the support must come from a national level. It must not only come from the coaches or those schools that they attend, but overall. And again, I think Glenn mentioned it, there must be a formalized program from the different organizations, the JOA, the J3s, and all those other sporting organizations that can assist in doing the total culturalization of the youngster.
Okay, Marlon, as a younger coach, what's your take on the specialist school? I remember Dr. Muggy Graham when we were talking about athletes transfer some years ago. This was mostly about football. Brought it up, said if we want to create athletes, let's manufacture them, but don't include them in the generic thing. That could be another conversation for the rest of the night. But Marlon, what do you think about a specialist school at the high school level?
Well, certainly, I believe it is something that could work. But in explaining it, I would like to also share my experience as it relates to the Cuban setup. It is similar to what Sir Wilson mentioned about Europe. So in Cuba, you have ADES and ESPAs. So you have schools of initialization to sport, and you have schools of specializations to sport. One of the problems with it, however, it develops what you call categorization, which means that the coach that is working at the initialization level and the coach that is working at this is not the same coach working at the specialization level. So an athlete normally spends 2 years with a coach, 1 year to adapt, the other year to produce results. And one of the things that came out in my research then was that the athlete at 16 many times would perform far better than when he's 19 or in his early 20s. It's one of the reasons, also the contrast between their system and our system, why it actually worked, where an athlete was able to spend maximum 7 years with his coach. The system, a specialized system, however, in the context of Jamaica certainly can work if we continue to do frequent, whether you want to call it seminars, workshops, and so forth, so as to remind persons of the roles and responsibilities that they have as coach. Remind them also of the dynamics of child development. We have all said it. An athlete who is going through puberty certainly goes through different phases. I'm not sure. I know quite a few coaches pretty much would know that, especially those who would have done level 1. They understand that because it was a part of their preparation as to if that knowledge is used whenever they are coaching and so forth. Because one of the problems, as many persons would have said in the chat, we sort of focus on winning rather than the development of the individual that ultimately contributes to longevity and relevance in the sport thereafter. So it is something that we certainly would have to look at and ensure that the right persons are there, the right system is there, and something probably we could have across all the counties across Jamaica, rather than having one, have 3, because one of the things you also realize with Cuba, using volleyball as example, they have a perfect system of identification of talent and selection. You will not find a new talent in the primary school system or high school system that they would not have identified, because it is something done systematic. And it is something that we would need to look at and understand that whatever it is we are doing, certainly it is for Jamaica and not for a particular individual, as is sometimes the issue in some of the programs. But certainly, as I said before, it can work if it is done properly.
All right. You have a paper. You have a paper to publish, Marlon, and I'm sure the college can support you. I'll be happy to support. And let me tell you, the truth is, if we're going to continue in this vein, where 25 medals is our goal at the Olympics level, and now with World Cup football for both men and women, I saw the Belgian blueprint. And the point that Mr. Mills made, J3 is a GOA. It has to be the national federations. What was the score in the Belgian match? I think they beat Russia 3-0. So the truth is, our national federations must take some responsibility for development. And even if the schools don't want it, you have to get involved. And so that's the ultimate. I'll go back to Mr. Fennell though. Administration over the years, I think we have been stymied by a little process called democracy, where a lot of our leaders are elected through a process called an election. And so a lot of the development plans that probably were in place have not been carried out because different administrations have different focus. Mr. Fennell, as somebody who has led all over the world, not just in Jamaica, what do you think is the response from an administrative standpoint, how we can get around this, having identified that we are a sporting nation?
Carol, you need a whole new seminar on that one. I can't give you an easy answer on that, because on the one hand, democracy is accepted as the fairest and best way to operate, but it's a humbug. It holds you back. And, not everybody can have a leader like what they had in Singapore to cut through the cattle and progress the country without denying everybody their rights, because that is not always possible. That's a very difficult question to answer. And I don't think there's any substitute for that. We have to go through it. Democracy and our various constitutions prescribe a governance structure that we must respect. If you don't respect that, how can you respect the rules of the sport? You have to lead the way with that. So I don't think there's any substitute for that. But what we need, as you would know, is the training of our sports leadership through various programs to ensure that they understand the dynamics of the new today and the new tomorrow. And this is even going to be required with the pandemic, because it's going to demand, like in business and industry and agriculture, a totally new tomorrow. And that will be required right now. So, this is something that we need to look at. But could I make two other points since I'm on the floor?
Sure.
Firstly, we're talking about moving from champs and transitioning into other things. The problem is that we all see the country sees champs as a destination and not as a part of the journey. And even the media does not help us, because they over-glamorize the champs victors without emphasizing the fact that they have not yet truly arrived. Yes, it's big in Jamaica. Now, how you get that balance, I don't know, because it's great for the event, it's great for everything else. But we need to ensure that. The other point is that we need to ensure that we cover another problem, because there's a trust deficit between the advisors and the youngsters. And not only the youngsters, but the youngsters' parents as well. So you have different minds, different approaches. You're getting one advice from the coach, you're getting one advice from the friends, the old boys or old girls association, and the teachers, etc. We have to cover that. There's more uniformity in the advice we're giving them, because ultimately the youngster is affected. And if we need to address that and find a way to address it. We can't do it this evening, but I think it's an important area to cover that trust deficit. And the other point is that we need to be able to whilst people are doing well and they've performed exceptionally for their school in this thing we call champs, we have to find a way to let them know that if we're going to make that into a career, they have a different set of counseling, one that they can trust and believe in and understand that can lead them to other things as well.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fennell. Some questions regarding the poll. We're just trying to find out who is watching, who is on. So that's what the voting is for. And we'll post the results in a second. Time flies when we're having fun and when good information. And the esteemed panel have been able to figure out, you have all made brilliant points, but it is just about 7:30. And we're going to try to close another 15 minutes to ensure that everybody, but let's go back to the pathway. When we think of a pathway in Jamaica, you all know the highways. Remember, we used to drive through the gorge into Mount Ross and so on. Now we have highways. And so we're getting to places quicker. And in 2021, there is a misunderstanding that there is a quicker way to get to the end game than we had before. Dr. Jones, I see you shaking it. I'm going to start with you. From your perspective, and even if you want to share other things that the others have spoken about, what then is your recommendation for a pathway if we had the resources?
You still have to go through the process. There's no quick way to success. You still have to go through the process in terms of development, training, both physically and mentally to get to the end point. I want to mention something about the specialization, specializing early and these specialized schools. That can be a dangerous path to go down, because studies have shown from that Major League Baseball and National Basketball Association that athletes who specialize early, who make it to the pros, they get injured more easily and their careers are shorter. And there are different medical explanations to suggest why. One is that if you do multiple sports and multiple events growing up, you develop a lot of your other muscle groups and different and coordination and so forth, which makes you able to better cope with the sport that you're taking part with. The other thing as well is that if you start to specialize early, you have a high risk of them developing burnout, both physical burnout and mental burnout, where the athlete gets fed up and no longer wants to compete. So at the high school level, I still think it's very important that we just focus on as broad a program as possible, allowing the athletes to enjoy themselves and develop naturally and not trying to force them down a rabbit hole of becoming a sprinter or a hurdler or a jumper or whatever, but allow them to develop and not make that decision until they're near skeletal maturity. A lot of the athletes who have done very well for us, people like Michael Holding, remember Holding was a decent 400 meter runner. Seymour Newman was a decent cricketer, was actually supposed to be faster than Holding at the youth level as a pace bowler. And if you look in the NFL now, the top best young quarterbacks played more than one sport when they were in high school. Mahomes, Kyler Murray, Russell from the Seattle Seahawks, they all played multiple sports in high school. So this specialization, school and so on, I think can be very dangerous. You have to be careful. Look at all of the young individuals, especially the females who went to tennis academies, Jennifer Capriati and so forth, who were burnt out before they were 20, reached Wimbledon semifinals when she was 14 or 15 and so forth. You have to be careful. We're talking about these specialized schools and so forth. And if the school system as is adequate with the right guidance and coaches and so forth, informing themselves and guiding the athletes appropriately, it can continue to produce athletes who can do well at the highest level.
If we have any potential PhD students in here, this is a nice study that we could use. I'm throwing out ideas for those of us who want to do further education. Dinsford, you asked a question about the National Sports Council. There is one. They have not met in 5 years. Yes, 2016. I won't go down that route, but there is a group that was formed back in the 70s, and the successive governments have appointed various people. They haven't met in 5 years. Fabian Paul is agreeing. The truth is academies have changed, and so the specialized schools that I asked the question about wasn't necessarily the Gileads or the dancing, because yes, I know of the burnout, but just to form our own academies, to integrate. And specialized schools now have as much an elite education program as possible. All right, any other recommendation? Because we're wrapping up. So Dr. Jones, your final statement just before we switch to the other panelists. What, as I said, if you had the resources, what would your answers be?
If I had the resources, to educate coaches, athletes, parents, and so forth in terms of the differences between the student athlete and an adult. I cannot overemphasize that point. They're not young adults, so don't coach them like that. Don't give them these programs like the programs you give to adults. Allow them to develop, allow them to explore their options, because when you look at the athletes who have done well in the world, Sebastian Coe, he used to long jump, he ran long distance and so forth before he became the 800 meter world record holder back in the day. Most of your athletes who will do well in the long term are athletes who were never overly specialized or overly coached in high school, and they developed later on. They weren't the best necessarily in high school, but they developed later on after high school.
All right, thank you. So the results of the poll. Obviously, there are more coaches online, and we have teachers and educators watching. Thank you very much. So the coaches and the teachers, sports administrators. Interesting. And we had other I'd be interested to know what the others are, but we won't get into that. QB, as a long time, and Dr. Holt, I see your comments. You have been an integral part of sport. Another one. Doc made a very good point about playing sport. When, first of all, the school that I went to, we had PE twice a week, and we played everything. One of the things I taught when I was volleyball president, I taught the players dancing, because I realized that although they were physically strong, they never had good coordination. But that's for another panel. QB, I'm gonna come to you as a longtime agent. What if Adidas was able to be given an opportunity? I'm joking. As a longtime agent, QB, what are some of the things that you would want to see Jamaica get now into the next 5 to 10 years to make their program more successful for the all-round thing that you speak about? Please unmute your mic, sir.
Unmute somebody. Okay. Let me say this, Carol. I might not be answering your question directly, but I've always looked at athletics as a triangle where there is the athlete, there's the manager, there's a coach with all equal angles. I don't want to be very morbid, but athletics was dying before the pandemic and it's dying right now. My advice to any coach, my advice to any parent is to send your kids to school. Let them have an education, because as we all have said here, education is the main thing. Listen, we lost our way in Jamaica in that we focused too much on champs, we focused too much on sport, we focused too much on not developing the young adults as a total human being. And I'm being morbid, but it's the truth. The athletes are carrying the sport right now. Look, the last couple of meets we've been to, the athletes have paid their way by air, they've paid their hotel rooms, and they're running for nothing just to compete, to get a time to go to the Olympics. No, there's no money to be made. This is the misinformation that young coaches and old boys and old girls who don't understand are saying to these young adults. I would say to the young adults, get your education. If you're offered a scholarship to go to school, take it. If you're offered a scholarship to go to junior college, take it. It ain't there anymore, Carol. It is not there. And that's all I'll say.
All right. Thank you, QB. Mr. Mills, what would your legacy be in the sport of track and field, and even some of the other sport that you have contributed to? What would you want your legacy to be if you had the resources and you could make an adjustment to the current setup?
Well, Carol, I would like to see a greater involvement in the development of our young sportsmen and women, especially from the associations. I don't think they do enough to help in the developmental stage. Maybe it's a question of funds. I think it's time for us to have a national lottery that funds sports. But a lot of the coaches needs equipment, they need support, and they have a lot of outstanding youngsters under their care. And not many schools have the support that it needs to develop these youngsters. And so I would love to see a greater involvement, not interfering with the program, but greater support within the program.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. I see the questions online regarding, let me see if I can respond. There is a plan, Janet. There is a plan. So the recording will be available after. It's going to be on YouTube. Jamaica does have the human resources, but there's too much burden being put on our athletes and parents to develop. The truth is that our education system does not facilitate or see physical education and sport as part of its thing. It's called physical education for a purpose, but that's another discussion for another day. One of the good recommendations, we talk about the alliance between J3, JOA, and Issa for a more all-rounded program. QB, your points are well taken. You have always spoken very clearly and succinctly. Olive, as we get ready to go to the Olympics, what are some of the challenges you see happening now after the trials in terms of visa? Just very quickly, tell us what are, because you're going into Japan, anything
Okay.
you'd like to
Well,
indicate to us that,
as you know, the COVID-19 pandemic will create a new dynamics about logistics and travel. Before, the athletes usually have issues with visas and passports and their itineraries. Now, this COVID passport that you're going to need is going to possibly become a reality. Athletes cannot. I got a call the other day where athletes had booked a ticket online and was stopped because you can't leave the US to go to Europe to go to via the US. So there are going to be challenges how you travel. So both, as you know, so greater care is going to have to be put in place in logistics, planning, and travel for athletes to get from the Jamaica to Japan, whether it's, as you know, there are no fans going to be there, but even just to coordinate in the logistics of their accommodations, persons are going to asking for COVID negative tests. So it is going to be more planning and logistics will have to be put in place for athletes and coaches and family and fans to move from home bases to wherever they're going. The whole thing of Europe at the moment is locked down. You can't just move to Europe just like that without ensuring the country. You have to check each country what they have in place as their COVID-19 protocols. So it is ensure that you have the proper structure in place to be able to manage and to find out what is happening in terms of the travel logistics. Very more so because of COVID-19. It is going to be more, you're going to almost have a COVID passport to travel, to go into hotels. They require negative COVID tests. You have to go into, we know if you have to go into quarantine when you're traveling. So you're going to have to know to plan all of that logistics, going into different countries. What are the protocols for different countries? And I noticed that our athletes were moving about from country to Jamaica or to elsewhere, but some of those protocols were not being adhered to. But I think countries are going to now want to ensure that stricter protocols are put in place, especially due to the pandemic. And of course, going to the fans, as you know, there will be no fans allowed in for Tokyo, but hopefully for the next sporting events, we can have greater support, fans be there to support our athletes.
Thank you very much, Olive. So Maurice actually gets the last word, and then I'll wrap up. But to kind of bring him into the discussion, to close it and to make his recommendations, we want to see him in the position as a leader of the institution that has almost specific responsibilities to train our technical and administrative professionals in the business of sport. So while track and field is our focus, Mr. Wilson, what are some of the programs that you have in place, not necessarily to clear the pathway, but to make it open so people can actually see based on the discussion that we have had today? Mr. Wilson?
Well, thank you again, Carol. We have a multiplicity of programs at the college, and we continue to evolve. We start with 45-hour courses, whether it be in sports massage, fitness training. So we're giving opportunities to those athletes who are extremely talented and those who want to choose sports as a career to start at a point, whether or not they matriculate to the college level. We also have an associate's degree program in coaching, in sports massage and fitness. We go up to the undergraduate level in teacher training, physical education, and sports. And we do have a master's program. I think the fascinating thing about the institution is that it facilitates all individuals from all walks of life. And irrespective of which sport, there's opportunity for persons to excel, not only as an athlete, but as a teacher or someone that is involved in sports. I think the question that was what was mentioned about specialized schools, I think there is some misinterpretation in relation to what I think was being asked. I do believe that there's a place for our athletes who are 18 and 19 would have gone through the system and decides that they want to become a professional, the pathway to elite performance. That pathway must involve organized training. I'm not saying it must be systematic or it must be one kind of training, because you're now 18, you're approaching adulthood, and you have decided that you want to become a track athlete or whatever other sporting athlete. And so the proper support must be provided. The sports psychologists, the nutritionists, and all the other areas that will contribute to your performance. Dr. Jones will tell you, because we communicate a lot. In relation to some of the injuries that we're seeing, some of the injuries are out of ignorance. And when we talk about the training of coaches, it is ongoing. It's a role for GC Foster College, but it continues to evolve, and just sometimes we're not able to capture every single one, or their attitude or their philosophy is a little bit different. It may more lean to winning, as someone would have said on the chat forum. So it is important for us to identify at 18 and 19, coming out of champs, your final year, athletes, identify the persons who are experienced and knowledgeable that will provide the mentorship and the guidance in terms of education, in terms of rehabilitation, and all the other areas that can assist them in becoming decent human beings. I think if we are able to do that, it will be a win-win for all. And so we continue the process of trying to create social change by the starting of this forum. So indeed, I think this is a huge start nationally and internationally, and we will continue to do the work.
All right, thank you very much. I have to make a special recognition to Simon Boyne, who it is what, Sunday morning in New Zealand. Simon is a former track and field coach, a graduate of the parish of St. Catherine. I think he went to St. Catherine High and would have coached in Atlanta. And he's now doing very well in engineering over in New Zealand. So Simon, thanks for joining. The discussions will continue, but one of the things in wrapping this discussion, and Mr. Fennell, you'll get the last word as the senior, as the elder in the group, but I want to say that if you have an athlete that is willing to go the extra mile, ensure that knowledgeable coaches and technical teams are around these people. Structured programs, training, and preparation. The support that Mr. Fennell talked about, that a lot of people don't know that where the support comes from. So despite the interference sometimes of some of those groups, there is support, and athletes and parents and families must be aware of this. The competitions are national, regional, international, and they are professional competitions. And then you go ultimately to the World Championship and the Olympic Games. The scope of work is to improve your talent and to make you a better person to adjust in real life. And then there's my area, the brand development and media training. That's a separate thing. Because now we see, right? Look at what happened in the French Open with Naomi Osaka and Roger Federer. And we can see, so even the things with the social media and so on, right? The incentives. So while there's not a lot of money in the sport, if you play your cards right, you can get incentives to be branded. All right. And there are lots of products and services out there that require ambassadors that you can earn so much more from being endorsed. The truth is, guys, once you get all of that, you will be recognized and rewarded by the system. So as I said earlier, this panel, and we thank Cliff for hosting us, but this panel, as I said, brought some really good discussions. The pathways, or the pathway has bumps, it has curves and turns, but ultimately, if as a nation, we have the mindset that we will get there with a broad program in the high school level, and with some specialized training. Mr. Fennell he has been called to solve so many problems internationally. And sir, I give you the last word. In terms of administratively, again, I want to emphasize, what is it, in addition to what Mr. Mills has said, would be 2 or 3 things that we need to do to reassemble ourselves and look forward to the next 30 years, what we can do with sport, but specifically track and field in Jamaica.
Well, Carol, you put me on the spot, but I can't answer that simple as that. First of all, I think this has been a fantastic event, a fantastic conversation, where we expose a lot of things that have been below the surface, some on the surface, and we're really done a lot. But it demands a follow-up. And I'm going to ask the GC Foster College, in congratulating them for initiating this program this afternoon. I'm going to ask them, no, I'm not going to ask them, I'm going to demand that the GC Foster College has a follow-up session. Once they've analyzed all the suggestions and comments that were made this afternoon, and the questions that were asked and some were not answered, to look at it and have a follow-up program which could be tighter and deal with those specific areas. Because if we do not follow up, this would be just whistling in the wind. It has been a great afternoon and talking about a very sensitive subject to which we need to find some answers, if not complete answers, where we go from here. I want to emphasize that the GC Foster College has played a critical role, but like all other tertiary institutions, they educate people who need to be trained in specific areas of sport after their university education. So we should not ignore that training. And Carol, you're in a very good position to do this, because as you know, when we're discussing the Sports Masters program, we emphasize the fact that people may have specialist degrees in specialist areas, but nobody has any overall experience in sports administration that needs to be tutored and shaped.
Yes,
I do believe that there are many, many questions still to be answered. And I think that follow-up session will direct us and point us in a better direction so that we can develop a roadmap for this very sensitive subject leading into the future. And my last point is we also need to recognize that the pandemic that we have had for over a year now is going to show us some new opportunities as to how we need to go into the future and not just think it's a continuation of the past. This is very, very important. And I'm very appreciative of the fact that I was invited to participate in this. And thank you all very much.
Thank you, Mr. Fennell. Your words of wisdom continue to run through the minds of some of our people. And, you know, and I think it is important that the discussions we've had, the team that assembled this have all the notes and they will put together the discussion. And I guess we'll go back, as the cricketers do, to the drawing table and come back with some things. Mr. Okonsiah Smith and Mr. Gale, the team at GC Foster, who relentlessly worked hard in getting as many participants as possible. Trinidad and Tobago, New Zealand, Antigua, our friends from the region, and I see the recommendation for a center in CARICOM. CARICOM now has a new Secretary General. She's a woman, so I'll see what happens, because the last couple of years we have had very little out of them. I continue to say that, and I won't stop until I see results. Thank you very much, Mr. Wilson, for giving me this opportunity to moderate this panel. GC Foster continues to lead the charge, as you should, and as you will continue to do. And I hope our listeners and viewers, and I'll pick out Dr. Michelle Holt. You've been awfully quiet. I know you're helping netball and hockey, but we need you back in the business of sport, young lady. Come back and help us, because the kind of diversity that is required to make sports successful in Jamaica required all hands on deck. Again, thank you very much. And we're hoping, yes, you're back. We're hoping that when we do this again, you'll all join us and spread the word. All right, good luck to all the teams that will participate and athletes in the trials coming up the end of the month. And of course, we look forward to successful participation in the Olympic Games. And I must end by saying, Khadija Bonishaw, a product of St. Catherine, has now signed with Manchester City. And I think that requires plenty congratulations. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, and have a great rest of weekend.
Right.
And thanks to you, moderator.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
Carol, and
Thank
thank you, fellow panelists and listeners.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Thank you. No.
All right, guys.